Hello, everyone. Welcome to Data Science Conference Europe. Our next speaker is Amanda Brock. She's the CEO at Open UK, and she will deliver a keynote with a unique perspective as the UK moves to the Brexit. She will look not only at the impact of these governmental and state activities on technology, but the impact of the overall geopolitical landscape, data and digital sovereignty, a cloud for Europe and Asia, bifurcation of the internet, and the importance of open technology with open source software underlying all of this at the inevitable place of open data at the heart of both business and government future models. Amanda is a world-leading expert in open technology with over a decade in open source. She holds a number of advisory roles, including chairing the UN and Technology Innovation Labs in IP and open source advisory, and being a member of the KDE and OASIS Open Standards Body Advisory Boards. So Amanda, welcome, and thanks a lot for joining us today. It's really an honor to host you today.
Thank you very much, Anita. Just checking everybody can hear me okay. I'm assuming you can.
Perfectly.
Great.
Perfect.
Thanks for that very kind introduction. It always worries me when I'm described as a world-leading expert. No pressure on me there.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Also, thank you to the organisers of DSC, both for holding an open day and for inviting me along to be part of that and to deliver this keynote to you. As Anita said, my name's Amanda Brock. I'm the CEO at an organisation called Open UK. And Open UK is really a year old in its current form. I came on board almost exactly a year ago, actually. We were just celebrating that to lead the organisation. And when I was first asked, I actually said no. I have a background where I'd spent 25 years as a lawyer. I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. I wanted to do something like be a CEO. But for me, an organization that was focused geographically seemed very narrow. I'd worked on an international basis since 2000. I really see myself as an international person. I think of myself as European. So doing something that would really focus on the UK was a bit strange. And it just didn't fit with where my mindset was. And then I'd recently moved back from Amsterdam. I was sitting in London watching what was happening around me with Brexit. And I realized that things were changing and that for the UK, there was a real need for us to pull together and to work collaboratively, not just internally within the UK, but on a global basis. And that's what spurred me to take the role that originally I hadn't wanted. And I'll talk more to you as I go through this presentation about the things that impacted my decision there and what we're doing with that, which all interrelates. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about Open UK, which you might find strange, but bear with me because it will all take you through my journey. I found in the UK very quickly that there was a massive pool of people that I could draw down on who were internationally recognized across not just open source software, but open hardware and open data. And I pulled a group of 12 of us together to form the board and got them into London. One of my last face-to-face meetings, to be quite honest, in January last year, and we had a strategy day. And they're intentionally very strong characters, people who are quite visionary. And I was extremely surprised that we managed to get to a point in a day where our vision was clear and where we, agreed on that uniformly across the group. And that vision was to develop and sustain UK leadership in open technology. Now, if you haven't heard the term open technology before, it's one to start to look out for. For us in the UK, within Open UK, we consider it to be open source software, open hardware, and open data. And the amalgamation of these three is critical. What we see with hardware is increasingly blurred boundaries between hardware and software as time goes by, and particularly around open in those spaces. But of course, you will not have failed to see, because it is now front page news and governments are considering it, that the business models of the future in a digitally transformed world focus almost entirely on data. Data is the new oil. Data is critical and key to all of our futures, all of our businesses, whatever we do. Now, that data we would like to be open. And we think that having open data makes room for better innovation and further collaboration. So we bring together those three: open source software, open hardware, and open data. And I'm dwelling on that because we are the first organization in the world to come out and say that is our goal. We're seeing others who've traditionally had a focus on open source software moving more towards that as the hardware movement and the data movements get stronger. But what I believe we'll see is a transition in our own space to open technology. And I think if you go off and you work it out, everything that anybody does on an open basis somehow fits into those three. Now, with Open UK and that focus on open technology, we started to pull together back in January, February, a number of different events and activities. And those initially, as you would probably expect, they moved forward on a slightly more random basis as we found what worked and what didn't work. We pivoted and adjusted to the pandemic like everybody else. I would much rather be on a stage talking to you face to face and being able to hang out with you in the corridor afterwards, but this is what we have. And it's a pivot, right? We're all changing our tack and trying to make this work for the time that we have to. So, what we've discovered in the last 10, 11 months is that actually everything we do within Open UK not only focuses on open technology, but it also falls into three categories, or as we refer to it, the three pillars. And those three pillars are community, legal and policy, and learning. Now, within community, we're trying to pull together what is a vast community of people across the UK working in open. And that vast community of people are a bit disparate, and they're a bit disparate because they've worked globally, they've worked internationally, they collaborate on a global scale that transcends any geopolitical issues, and that's critical to how they work. However, as we come to a decision of Brexit, and I'll come back to that more in a moment, as we move to that decision, it's important for us to, in our geographical space, be collaborative and be unified to create a strong voice for our communities within our geographical space. And that was something that I understood with Brexit. And again, I'll talk more about Brexit and Europe in a moment. So we build this visible and live community, and we've done that in a number of different ways. We created an awards which has been really well received. We had a 90% attendance, which is unheard of at the event. We had 84 people nominated, or organisations nominated, which for a first year is incredible. And I think it's something that's really celebratory and at that grassroots level is important. We also are working with the National Museum of Computing at Bletchley Park, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And we're working with them to create an exhibit which will cover the history and future of open. And we'll do that physically if we can in 2021. But if we can't, we will also have a virtual experience. And we've worked very hard to develop a supporter model which will allow a transition where our board become elected next year. And that supporter model allows people to subscribe for a relatively low amount each month, and they get the right to vote for our board. So we keep that away from corporates, and we keep that in the hands of the people effectively, the people involved in this, the people who want to see this happen. We've also created something called Future Leaders, which I'll come back to in a moment. So, with that community, bringing that community together, what we've then done is understood that that community needs to be vocal and its voice needs to be heard, and it needs to be heard at a legal and policy level. So, we go to our second pillar, legal and policy. And there we need to respond to legislation and we need to drive policy. And we need to do that in a way that makes the UK a great place for open, where the laws and the government procurement and public sector, where the data privacy and data sovereignty regulation, all of that good stuff works towards an environment that's open friendly. And that's not just inward looking, that's something that's outward looking. So as we develop our policies, we want to be able to provide services from the UK on an open basis through businesses, whether those are UK or international businesses, whether it's a case of selling a service from the UK or the case of working as an open source developer for an international organization. And we have a raft of people working across all of those open organizations, but also providing open services in other organizations. Now, let me just get back to where I was. We having influenced that legal and policy, hope that we can shape things. And we're shaping not just the policies, but we're effectively shaping the workforce of the future. It was easy for us actually to become quite established relatively quickly in policy and in the legal side, because frankly, we have um, a really strong group of people within that space who have an international reputation, and it goes back to this internationalization around open. And within 5 months of operating in our current form, we were recognised by the European Commission's Open Source Observatory, OSCE. You'll see on the bottom right on this slide that they recognise Open UK as the strategic player in the UK around open source. And that's something that we're really proud of. We were also asked to go and speak to the UK government trade negotiators as they negotiated the Brexit treaties. We submitted an amicus brief in the Google Oracle litigation because obviously keeping the APIs open is really important to open source. You know, we were able to do a lot very quickly. But as we looked around the room and we were still doing physical meetings, nobody was really under 40, to be quite honest. And having that reputation and that gravitas was great in terms of having credibility, but it was really bad for the future. So what we did was we proactively set up a group of future leaders. It currently has 17 members. We had a new one just this week. It's a very mixed group. There are a lot of lawyers and policy people. There are some procurement people and business people. And we've been actively mentoring them, and they're working on a report of government procurement terms and processes in the UK and their open friendliness. And the UK had been a thought leader 10 years ago in open. We had a groundbreaking strategy that was very much world leading of open first, but it didn't have teeth. And that also is something I'm going to come back to you when I talk about Europe. Um, so bringing people on, having that education and that training to create the workforce of the future is critical to us. Now, we'd not just thought about the sort of future leaders in a business context, we also looked at children. And what we want is to see children being educated around technology, around digital skills, around computer sciences in a more practical way. And the way we view is best to achieve that is to be hands on and focused. So, what we've done is look to build a GCSE. We have a devolved situation around education in the UK, so we need to not just have a GCSE for England, we need to take account of the different education systems that use those, and Scotland has a different education. So we're looking at a GCSE or equivalent within the current academic structure. Now, we don't expect that to be something that's taken mainstream. Schools are targeted on league tables, which that won't get into for a number of years. What we will do is we will put that into colleges, and we will hope to have it accredited and added to the school curriculum as an option. And what we will do there is have a very practically focused, broad reaching, open technology qualification that doesn't just teach how to code. You won't just learn Python, you'll learn why Python is open, how you use licensing, what the governance issues are, what community means, how you contribute. We will also, on a more practical level, and this is something I'm quite passionate about, you may hear me speak about it in other contexts. Many of my developer friends haven't been to university, or they have and they didn't stay very long. And what has happened for them is that they haven't been able to fit within the current education system around computer science, and they have gone off and they are self-taught, they've become part of communities, they've become thought leaders actually in this open source space. And we want to work with those kind of people also. And in doing so, we wanted to set up an apprenticeship scheme around open. Now, that doesn't really work within the UK infrastructure. So we are now looking at something called a knowledge module, which will match curriculum wise what we're doing with the GCSE, but it will be a very hands-on practical module that can be added once it's approved to different apprenticeship schemes. And our goal there is to have that ready to launch by the end of 2021 and going into the curriculum in 2022. Now, to achieve that from zero is hard, and we have no credibility. So what we've done is through 2020, even I'm getting ahead of myself, we have run a kids competition. That competition was set up pre-pandemic. It was sponsored by Red Hat with some additional support from GitHub around our administration project management. And the competition was meant to be run so that we could bring kids to London in June to have a final. We were very lucky to have the support of Imogen Heap, the double Grammy winning singer, who is behind a number of digital and technology projects, including the MyMoo glove. And Imogen's MyMoo glove, which Ariana Grande also uses, has been replicated for kids in a simplified version in the Mini Moo glove kit. Now, during our process this year, the Mini Moo glove kit has actually been open sourced. It's on an open hardware license. And it uses a BBC microbit, something that a lot of kids have in the UK, which is available through schools and available through public libraries. So in looking to use that for our competition, we were thinking very much of digital inclusion. However, we were going to bring kids to London in June to meet Imogen and hang out in the Red Hat labs and compete with each other. And obviously, the pandemic stopped that. So we pivoted, and we pivoted to creating a 10-episode course which we would give to the kids in the competition. That's an animated course. Each episode's about 10 minutes long. It uses the glove and it teaches both digital skills and open source. And as we produced that, which it was done at a fraction of the cost it should have been, but it is a professionally developed course with, professional animator, voiceover artist, and creative behind the content. As we developed that, we realized that it was too good to just give to the couple of hundred kids in our competition rather. And we launched a kids camp which ran in August and which will be rerun next Easter. And we worked with Huawei in this instance to have a glove kit giveaway, and we gave away 3,000 kits to kids, 1,000 to individual children, 2,000 to schools and community groups to allow them to participate in the camp and teach those skills. And we did that as a credibility building exercise and an awareness exercise to start to get to know those involved. Moving on from our three pillars, we are also involved in an open healthcare project working with Open Chain, where Open UK is helping the developing the Open project, which is an EOBS monitoring system. We are working with that to try to build a governance structure which will be Open Chain compliant. And Open Chain, as you may know, is an open supply chain project which receives an ISO accreditation in September. On a personal level, I don't just work with Open UK. I'm sure you'd be surprised to hear because we are busy, but I also have a few other roles in Open. I'm a European representative of the Open Invention Network, which celebrated its 15th birthday this week. It is the world's biggest defensive IP organization in history, and it now actually, the slide is out of date, has 3,400 plus members. It's a patent pool where everybody who signs up does so for free. They all sign the same terms. It's open to anyone. So if you're working in Open and you're not a member, you should be. Please contact me and I can direct you so that you can join. And what you do there is you agree to share your patents with everybody else in the group to the extent that they read on a Linux system definition, which is now over 3,000 packages. Happy to explain more on that to anybody, but it is really important as part of your good housekeeping and hygiene in open source. And as was mentioned in my intro, I chair an advisory for the UN for their open source technology and innovation labs. I'm a member of the OASIS Open Projects Board and KDE board. I'm going to just pause for a moment and mention the book that I'm working on. This should be published at some point in the spring of next year. We're a little later than we'd hoped because of the pandemic. We will probably be 6 months to a year behind where we'd scheduled. I mention it because it will be the seminal text on open source compliance and governance, legals and open source. And I'm very proud to say that not only is it published by Oxford University Press, it has over 20 international authors, most of whom are the world's leading expert in the particular area that they're writing about. Myself, mine is on commercial models, which I'm not the world's leading expert on, but I'm one of. But this is going to be available as an open access book, thanks to the Veach Foundation. And it will be available in both PDF and e-reader format. And then I guess the last thing that I do is this, talk to people. And I spend a lot of my life these days sitting in my kitchen talking to my cat, hoping that there are people at the other end of the internet listening to me. But in the past, traveling the world, talking at conferences, talking about open and its values to people. So I suppose these days I'm really an advocate for open. So how did a nice girl like me get into a space like open? Well, in 2008, in February 2008, I joined a company called Canonical, an open source company, one of the biggest in the world. At that point, I was employee 165, and we were a slightly mature startup founded by Mark Shuttleworth. And we were the commercial sponsor of the operating system Ubuntu. You'll all know Ubuntu. If you didn't until recently, you will now, as it sits under a lot of 5G, but it's also generally the biggest instance in public cloud. And like many things in public cloud, it's open source because our infrastructure is open. And it's worth just thinking about that. We're now living in a digitized world where everything is built on infrastructure. Businesses that hadn't digitally transformed have been dragged in the last few months through that digital transformation. And they're now at a point where they either create their products, distribute them, or have them consumed through software. We live in an open software based world. Many people understand through the digital transformation that they're now software companies, but they haven't quite got their head around the fact they're open source. All of the infrastructure that they're using is built on open. And I'm going to talk to you a bit now about Brexit and geopolitical shift, but it's critical to have that understanding that we're sitting in a public cloud world built on open source, even if the providers sitting on top of that are not entirely open. We have an internet built on open source, which allows things like bifurcation in China. So this is me at the last conference I went to before the pandemic, and it is on the 31st of January. The photo was taken a few seconds after midnight, after the UK had left the European Union. And if you're sharp-eyed, you'll see in the background that I'm standing outside the Commission. And I'm with three colleagues who are involved in Open UK. To my left is Kavita Kapoor, who is our Chief Learning Officer. To my right, Jonathan Riddle, who is the chair of our awards committee, led the awards in 2020 and will also be the chair in 2021. And to his right is Cheryl Hung, who is a leading light in CNCF, Cloud Native, which I'll refer to again later, but one of the people who is making that public cloud open source. Now, I use this photo because it's a good way of demonstrating Brexit. And I mentioned to you that I wasn't interested in Open UK until Brexit happened. And with Brexit, what I realized was that there was a risk of the UK becoming an island and becoming insular, which is not what we're all about. We're really not all about that. We've been about much more for a very long time as individuals, as an open community, and as a country. We may be Brexiting, but that doesn't mean that we focus internally, we focus globally. And a lot of that is about something that you will have heard of in the last year or so constantly, which is digital sovereignty. Started as data sovereignty, but now we often hear the term digital sovereignty. And the UK went down the route, government choice of a referendum, a public vote, and we Brexited. Right. So we have already technically left the EU. We're still part of Europe. We're no longer in the EEA. Doesn't really matter what your political views are, whether you think that's right or whether you think that's wrong. If you're here in the UK, it's time to get on with it. It's time to focus and time to look at what we can do to continue to collaborate and to be part of that global environment. So for me, I sat back and watched the changes that were happening. I had the concerns about the transition and us being isolated in any way. And I watched what was going on in Europe. Now, the European Union has had a focus on open that, in theory, is behind the UK's, but they have really put a concerted and committed effort into it in the last 18 months. And we've just seen them come out with an open source strategy. A year ago, they ran a workshop, a 2-day workshop on open source software, hardware, and data, trying to pull their thoughts together on this. And they went out to tender. They appointed Open Forum Europe, working with a German company called Fraunhofer, to look at a report on open source. And that report will be published at the end of January. They held their first introduction to it maybe a week or so ago, and this is a collateral, marketing collateral from that. Now, what Europe has done is really inspiring and something that the UK also needs to be doing and should be part of. We obviously are not part of it within a legislative framework anymore, but we should be at the same standards and collaborating. We are part of Europe. And not just part of Europe, we're part of a global open technology community, which involves collaboration within Europe and beyond. So I wanted to make sure that all of this good work that was happening in Europe, to the extent that my voice could be heard in the UK, was, but also I've been focusing on what's been going on in Europe. And what we've seen is a concerted effort. And I think a lot of that has to do with Margaret Vestager and her understanding of technology as the competition commissioner. So we're living in a world where we have some very big tech companies, which the European Union refers to, or the European Commission refers to as high tech companies. We have those, they're generally in the US, some are in Asia. I think there's one in the Middle East, but not really in Europe. And we've seen Vestager and her team spend a decade really focusing through the Competition Commission on how the revenue streams work in that environment and gaining an understanding, which few can match, if I'm honest, of how that works. For a number of years as a lawyer, I would get asked to contribute to different investigations. And what I found was that not many people really understood where the revenue models were. Now, those have shifted, obviously, as we've shifted into a more cloud focused environment, and cloud and platform are essential to all of this. But what we see now with Ursula von der Leyen's presidency and the appointment of Margaret Vestager as an EVP around digital is that things are changing and Europe is consolidating what it has done around technology and gaining an understanding of the place of open in that. I don't generally speak to slides full of words. You've probably noticed that. But if you look at this, there's a reason I've put it here. And this is from Ursula von der Leyen's letter in 2019 to Marguerite Vestager. I think it's her appointment letter, actually. And it says changes in digital technologies and geopolitics are already having a profound effect on the lives of Europeans. We're witnessing major shifts all the way from global power structures to local politics. What we do now will determine what kind of world our children live in and will define Europe's place in the world. If you swap Europe, whether it's Europeans, Europe's place, or the final statement, creating a Europe fit for the digital age, with UK, British, American, US, China, Chinese, that statement is equally true of every country, every geo area, however you're going to define it, by continent, by state, anywhere across the globe. And I think it's important to see that the Europeans are hitting the nail on the head here, or at least these two ladies are. And what they've done is they've pushed forward and they've done it at pace as we've gone through the pandemic. They've created a European strategy on data, recognizing the place of data in all of these technology business models, recognizing in the case that they've brought against Amazon on the Amazon, not AWS, but on the Amazon sales and platform, the consumer platform, where they are have let me get this right. They've put charges against Amazon around the use of data, of citizen data by Amazon, which has been gathered from its position as the provider of the platform and used in its competing with those vendors on the marketplace. Now, that's a similar situation to the cloud environment where AWS and others are the platform hosts, but then compete in the service layer. Sometimes that, in fact, creates lock in for customers with the big platform providers or lock out for companies providing tools that are sitting under there. And there's been a lot of discussion, debate, even litigation around this in the open source space. But that's not the purpose of my talk today. It's something I'm interested in and talk about, but it's separate. What we're seeing here is Europe recognizing the place of data, the importance of data, the fact that citizen data is at the heart of business models, that it's essential to these infrastructures, and that because of the way technology has developed, the pace at which it's developed, the big US companies' ability to buy European startups, that in the UK, we had a great startup called DeepMind, which was sold to Google. That is not atypical. That is a norm across Europe, and something that the Commission has been trying to get its head around, that the UK has been trying to get its head around for some time. And of course, that all sits in the picture of different political alliances across the globe. But what we now have is a world where tech is important to political leaders, where tech provides the infrastructure of our revenue streams and our businesses, which is absolutely essential. And the European strategy on data includes covering how strong concerns have been raised over the economic and social influences of non-EU technology companies, which threaten EU citizens' control over their personal data and and constrains both the growth of EU high technology companies, i.e. EU big tech, and the ability of national and EU rule makers to enforce their laws. So we're thinking here both about how we develop our own tech businesses, our own strong tech sectors, as well as building laws. And that sort of goes back to what I was talking about initially with Open UK and our goals, where we're looking at building a strong community, a strong individual and business community across the UK and Open, which is really fundamental to all technology at this point in development. But also, how do we shape legal and policy to make that world leading, to make us UK leaders in open technology? Now, the Europeans came out with an EPRS, a parliamentary briefing paper, back in July, and they're very clear on where they're going. They're very clear that their thoughts on this, their actions around it have been accelerated because of the pandemic. And the test and trace apps, which are something, again, that I've become very involved with, I've written a lot about, I've spoken a lot about, because inevitably to create transparency and trust, those have to be open. And in this paper, you'll see if you get, it's only 8 pages long, it's well worth reading. It really is a good paper. If you look at the top left-hand side on page 8, they talk about having digital markets regulation to make online platform ecosystems and online activities more open, fair, and predictable. And they talk there about creating an environment which will have open infrastructure. As you get to the end of that paper, there's an addendum. It has 20 odd different possible activities, many of which have already kicked off. And at 23, you'll see fostering an open digital ecosystem. And that's in fact happening. That's happening through the European open source policy that's just come out in the last couple of weeks. It's happened through the Parliament passing a regulation in April where they've said that things should be open first, where the UK was 10 years ago. But in this instance, they've added teeth. And what they've said is that if you're a European public body, you are going to have to demonstrate in an annual audit that you're open. And if it's not open, they're going to want to know why. Now, going back to that list in the EPRS briefing from July, the first thing on the addendum is an open infrastructure, an open cloud. And yesterday we saw Gaia X, which is a cloud for Europe, initially instigated by the German government, very much being pushed by the German and French governments in collaboration. We saw yesterday them move from their 22 founding members to, I think it was 181 day one members. And I haven't been able to update my slide deck. I provided it to the organisers in advance. But yesterday, Open UK was announced as a day one member of Gaia X. And we will actively be providing a conduit for the UK into Gaia X, trying to ensure we have the right engagement in this European cloud, in this federated data infrastructure for Europe. One of the Gaia X founders, Rafael Laguna, described us as a lifeline for the UK in Gaia X. And it's something that I'm very proud of and I'm very pleased for us to be. Because you see, as I'm trying to say, that as we move forward and we see data sovereignty at the heart of European regulation and the heart of UK regulation, we have this need to collaborate and to make sure that our laws will work together. So we don't quite know in the UK. We're waiting for our data strategy to come out. We had a launch of a data strategy in September, but that had a 5-week consultation, which closes on the 2nd of December, and we will then see this move forward. Now, there was a leak about an EU law, which is in fact correct. It is going to come into force, but it's not quite on the terms that were in this. So on the 11th of November, a new EU data regulation was announced. As we move forward, though, it's not just about Brexit, and this is absolutely critical to understanding of my point. It's not just about Brexit, it is, in fact, about making sure that we have a global environment in which we collaborate and participate. So in the EU environment, what we're seeing is not just them dealing with Brexit, but also dealing with Asia and issues with China. Um, this is an interesting article. We've seen perhaps there will be a shift in the US, but it's unlikely to be a great shift because we know that Biden's position, whilst maybe not the same as Trump's, is still one where there is a Cold War or an apparent Cold War between the US and China. We've seen this week Huawei pushing back in the UK. Huawei was removed from the UK 5G infrastructure in July, and we've seen them pushing back just this week, saying that with Biden's election victory, assuming he has won the US presidency, I can't believe I'm saying assuming he has won, but let's assume he's won. They're saying that with the change in the US, that the UK is not under the same pressure. We're also seeing press reportage in the UK talking about how we're going to deal with Europe and the need for our trade deals with Europe. And I'm not saying whether any of this is right or wrong. This is not a political talk. This is an observer's talk. And it's an observer's talk understanding what's going on in that geopolitical shift. Back in the UK, we're now looking at data. And we see with Gaia X yesterday that we're talking about data sovereignty. Now, within that data sovereignty, we're looking at data privacy laws. Data sovereignty and privacy are obviously different things, but we are looking at the data privacy laws and where those take us. For the UK, we're in an interesting position. We could become a data laundering island where we manage data because we're compliant and considered to be an appropriate environment by the EU, but also perhaps by Asia and the US as we sit in this island status. Who knows? But what we're seeing is a time of change. We're not seeing Brexit in isolation. We're seeing Brexit as a very profoundly clear first step across geopolitical shift. And all countries are going to be affected by these geopolitical shifts. But what is fundamental there? Now, what is fundamental is that to create this cloud for Europe, to create bifurcation of the internet in Asia, it is only possible at scale, at pace, and in a rigorous way because of open source. I've added this slide, and I'm just going to wrap up in a minute or two, but I've added this slide as a tribute to an open source leader, a chap called Dan Cohn, who died a couple of weeks ago. Not of COVID, I will say, but unexpectedly, and who was a real leader and who created this cloud native environment landscape for us. But if you look at it, you'll see there are 1,500 cards. Most of those refer to open source projects. And what you'll see is investment in those projects in the billions and market capitalization in the trillions, because open is fundamentally the infrastructure of our cloud. Now, that allows these geopolitical shifts. It allows us from the use of code to create infrastructure that will create our digital futures in these geopolitical environments. However, that only exists in the quality that it is because of collaboration. And what we've seen to create this technological environment is global collaboration, which needs to be protected and encouraged. So as we in the UK move through Brexit, please don't isolate us. Don't think you don't want to collaborate with us because you're in Europe. Remember that this is the first step in a picture that is going to create a very changing landscape post-pandemic, and one where technology is at its very heart, at its very core, but to protect the future for our children and for all of us, to ensure that we each in our own countries have that leadership on a global scale, we need to continue to collaborate and make sure that what we do is open. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I come to the end of my presentation. I'm very grateful to you for listening to me today and for your time. And thank you very much.